Hello, Integrated Science class. Mr. Foister here. I'm going to show you the demonstration lab called Comparing Craters that I filmed, where we're not able to do that in groups and the lab space, but you can still see it. So what we're observing is we are asked the question, how does erosional effects have an effect on craters? So we looked and thought about the Earth, and how there's many examples of craters. For example, craters out in the Midwest in Arizona. You could use the Grand Canyon, for example. Many others in New Mexico. But any other craters, and have they been the same as long as they've existed here on Earth? Meaning, have they looked the same? Are they the same size? Have they been affected by any changes? What about craters on the moon? How are they affected differently? So the question is do erosional effects have effects on a crater? Okay, so wind and water, for example, are erosional effects. Would that affect a crater over time? So we are using flour, and the flour can be quite messy. Sometimes it creates dough-like effects all over the lab. But we use flour and pie pans, and to make our craters, we have golf balls because they're more rigid. Typically, when we do this experiment, I tell and instruct students to wear eye goggles or protective eyewear. Here are the questions in the Google form that I've answered that you will be answering as well. So we would fill up 3 pie pans, and we are learning and testing a question, and the hypothesis is, are craters affected? Craters would be affected by erosional effects. Would they take an effect is the question and the hypothesis that we think about. So we set these up using independent and dependent variables. We're going to manipulate and change things. And if we manipulate and change a variable, that's independent. Okay. So what we're changing is the erosion. How much erosion is going to happen with the wind and water? We are going to control that in this experiment. What we are going to measure is the size of the crater. We can't change that at the very end of this. That's called the dependent variable. And then we have a control, which is a constant. We don't do anything. We'll make a crater and leave it the same to compare to one that's affected by erosion and one that's not. Okay. So we'd fill the pie pans up. We flatten those out just to make sure the texture is the same in all 3 of them. We're conducting the experiment. So then we drop a golf ball in it, and we will always measure the distance that we drop the ball, and we will measure the size of the actual crater when it makes its impact. Okay? We'll remove the ball, and we will measure the actual crater. So craters can be affected here on Earth by asteroids, meteorites, those things. So we have crater 1, and that's going to be our control, where we would not do anything to it. We're just going to use it to compare to our other 2. Our second crater is going to be for wind, where we would simulate wind erosion by blowing, and the flour would blow over it. And the third crater that we make in the third pie pan is a water. So for the wind and the water, this is what we would do. We would slightly edge the crater and blow over it. We'll create the crater the same way, and we'll measure those. And it's in the data table here. So here's us blowing the flour. Does wind affect the crater here from what you observe? We would measure it to see if it changed in size or diameter, using centimeters, of course. And for water, we would use a water dropper. And of course, with flour, it turns to dough, as you'll see right here. Right here. It almost has water resistance right here. So we would have to drop the water in and almost fill the crater up. Does it change the crater at all over time? So wind and on Earth would be from storms and just natural wind occurrences. Water would be represented from groundwater, rain, snow, those things that can affect over time. So we would measure it the same. And we would look at our control to compare. So our control measured 3 centimeters. I documented all of this in the chart. And then the last thing that you're going to do is a CER using this data to answer the question, did erosional effects affect craters here on Earth? All right, write your claim out. If you have any questions, let me know. Guys, take care.